In just a few hours, former President Trump's lawyers will make their case in front of the United States Senate as the former president's second impeachment trial continues. David Schoen and Bruce Castor will lead Mr. Trump's defense, arguing he was exercising his right to free speech and did not incite a deadly insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. We've learned that they met, as we said, with Republican Senators Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and Lindsey Graham last night to discuss today's strategy, despite, of course, the fact that these senators on your screen are jurors in this impeachment trial. This comes after Democrats spent the week laying out their case, accusing former President Trump of spending months undermining the November election and inciting his supporters to, quote, fight like hell to overturn our country's legal results. House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin warned of future violence if Republicans fail to convict.
President Trump declared his conduct totally appropriate. So, if he gets back into office and it happens again, we'll have no one to blame but ourselves.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is following the latest on the Hill.
The former president's legal team will argue this trial is unconstitutional and denies him due process. They described their meeting last night with Republican senators here on the Hill as friendly, even though those same senators are supposed to be impartial jurors. Last night, three of the trial's jurors, Senators Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Mike Lee, met with former President Trump's legal team to talk strategy.
We were discussing their strategy for tomorrow, and we were sharing our thoughts in terms of where the argument was and where it should go.
When asked if he was comfortable with the team's legal strategy, Cruz said the end result of the trial is already clear. Mr. Trump will be acquitted, but other senators are keeping an open mind.
You don't make a decision as a juror until you hear both sides. Period. End of story.
House impeachment managers rested their case, declaring the evidence against former President Trump is clear.
If you don't find this a high crime and misdemeanor today, you have set a new terrible standard for presidential misconduct in the United States of America.
The managers allege the former president had a pattern of inciting violence, pointing in part to his lack of condemnation after supporters swarmed Michigan's state capitol and the later uncovering of an alleged plot to kidnap the governor.
We got to get her going. I don't think she likes me too much.
And asked senators if they would risk giving Mr. Trump the opportunity to incite violence again.
Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that?
Today, former President Trump's legal team will counter by showing video of prominent Democrats allegedly making inciting statements to bolster their argument that the language Mr. Trump used during his rally is protected.
We fight like hell.
It's a powerful speech, but when he uses the word fight most of the times during the case, it's clear he's talking about legislators fighting for our rights.
Mr. Trump's lawyers are only expected to take a few hours for their presentation and could wrap their case today, which means a vote in this trial could happen as early as this weekend. Anne-Marie, Vlad.
Nikole, thank you. So for more on this, let's bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Thanks a lot, Caitlin. So today is all about former President Donald Trump's defense team. What can we expect? Walk us through it. We hear they are not going to be using up all 16 hours that are available to them to make their case.
That's right. We're expecting them just to use about 3 to 4 hours of that 16-hour time to make their case, their defense of the former president. And they're going to argue that he didn't get due process, that this is a First Amendment rights issue, and they're going to try to disconnect him from the events of January 6th. Because remember, that's been the key for the House impeachment managers. That's been key to their argument, making that direct link between what we saw happen here at the Capitol, those riots, the insurrection, connecting that back to Donald Trump, not only on that day, but over several months, even years, using rhetoric, behavior, language to incite violence. They're also going to try to flip flip the script a little bit, throw this back into the Democrats' corner, if you will, or trying to focus on language and rhetoric that Democrats have used and footage of in places like Portland and others to try to make that First Amendment case. Now, we'll see if it works. Remember that earlier this week, Republican lawmakers were very vocal in their disappointment in the defense's opening. They have since, as you mentioned, some of them have met with the legal team, even though they are jurors in this case, and they've been messaging to them and to the former president himself that they think there is room for improvement. We also know that watching the reaction and hearing from lawmakers yesterday after the House impeachment managers closed their case, that there was a sense of kind of fatigue with this process. While they were moved by video footage earlier in the week, yesterday felt like people were kind of breaking down again into party lines.
So, Caitlin, let's talk about where Republicans stand at this point, because as we mentioned, Senators Cruz, Graham, and Lee met with the defense team last night. The word out there is that a conviction is still highly unlikely, but I'm just wondering if you're hearing, for example, if there are some people who agree or at least found the House manager's presentation powerful, compelling, and feel that this rises to the level greater than, for example, the effort to impeach former President Bill Clinton over the actions that he committed in the Oval Office, of which Lindsey Graham voted, let's remind people, to convict President Bill Clinton for those actions.
You know, it's interesting. Lawmakers, Republican lawmakers up here have been compelled by the presentations that they've seen. A couple of days ago when we saw that never-before-seen footage of Mike Pence being whisked away with his family into a secure location, that really resonated with Republican senators here. They said they were moved by the video. They said they were horrified by what happened, but they're still able to find ways to kind of separate that from the former president. And so even though they have been moved by some of the presentation, yesterday it seemed like they were not willing to kind of connect those dots. Now, I should point out, however, that we're still kind of focused on those 6 Republican senators who voted that this process was constitutional, breaking from their own party ranks. And one of them, Bill Cassidy, who we've been talking about all week, had a really interesting statement yesterday. Remember, the House impeachment managers closed their argument by asking questions or saying the questions that they would have asked Trump if he were to come before them. Remember, they invited him and he declined. And they said, you know, why did you do nothing about this? Why did you just kind of sit back and not intervene, not call it off? And that's something that really resonated with Bill Cassidy, who said that he has those same questions for the defense team today and hopes that they outline that.
A lot of eyes on Cassidy, a lot of eyes on Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He had been very critical of the president. He had blamed the president for the siege on the Capitol building, but then he voted that this process was unconstitutional. Do we have any idea where he stands?
He has been very tight-lipped, and senators have been telling us that he is not giving them an indication of where he is going, and he is not urging them to vote a certain way, instead urging them to consider all of the facts of the case and vote the way that they feel that they need to. But it is important to note that even though he has been very critical of Trump in the aftermath of those January 6th attacks, he has said publicly that Trump provoked the rioters who stormed this Capitol. On the other hand, he, as you mentioned, voted that this wasn't a constitutional process. And just listening to some of the arguments from Republican senators up here, they've been pointing to that as kind of a fallback, that they can't vote to convict if they don't think that this is a constitutional process in the first place. He's also, given how he is a shrewd politician and really studies polling and where his base and where his members are, looking likely at the numbers that we've been talking about earlier this week in our CBS News poll that shows 71% of the party is still very loyal to Trump, wants their lawmakers to be very loyal to Trump, and so he knows that kind of competition or those pressures kind of coming from the base. But at the same time, he's interested in winning back power here in Washington. So, what does this mean in terms of winning back those voters that Republicans have lost over the past couple of years?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. And I know a lot of eyes are on Mitch McConnell. And there are a lot of pundits and people who are in D.C. who cover these individuals and have for many years that, believe, even though they don't have a clue as to what he might do, that he probably will not vote to convict. But as you guys both know, I'm kind of somebody who I just sort of think that Mitch McConnell, if you are a partisan and you're a Democrat, you probably don't like the way that he's behaved over the last, let's say, 10 years. If you're a Republican, you do. But what I've always noticed about Senator McConnell is that he plays within the rules. If he's doing something, it's not because he can't do it or it's not because it's unethical. You may not like it, but he's doing it because he can do it. The rules of the Senate and the Constitution and the way that we have organized our republic gives him the ability to do so. So that's how he plays the game. But what we're talking about here and what the House managers are trying to prove is that President Trump went outside the lines. He went beyond the game. He tried to prevent an election that was fair and free from going forward, either to try to overturn the results or to try to delay the certification of the Electoral College. That's outside the line. That's outside. That's out of bounds. And maybe Mitch McConnell was thinking about that, especially given that he's just been reelected, got another 6 years to go. It's not clear what he's going to do in 6 years. And he is a person, from all the interviews we've ever seen, that does think about his legacy.
That's right. And you compare the behavior of the former president to that of McConnell, who is very much has, institutionalist sensibilities. It seems to run exactly counter to that. However, part of what we've been hearing from Republican lawmakers up here is this interest in moving on and this interest in uniting together and kind of keeping a united front, because in order to win back power, a lot of the way you can do that politically is to have a united front against the opposition. And so that's kind of the political dynamics up here. And again, Republicans have kind of given themselves an out of conviction by falling back on that constitutional argument. And that's why I thought it was really interesting for the House impeachment managers yesterday to kind of close with that as well, saying, look, we've already decided, you've already voted, a majority of the Senate voted that this process was constitutional. So put that out of your mind. Focus here on the facts, but we have seen that over the past several years, these are lawmakers who can compartmentalize if they want to. And so we'll see kind of how that breaks down. But I do think it's important to note that even if they don't get the numbers necessary for conviction, and that seems highly unlikely, even more so, I think, hearing from lawmakers after yesterday, there still could be political fallout, and there still could be more bipartisan support for conviction than there was last time. Remember, Mitt Romney was the lone Republican to vote for conviction. We're expecting probably more than that, at least, even if it's not 17.
It felt to me like at least a portion of the argument yesterday from the impeachment managers was, directly to the Republican senators, essentially saying, if you don't convict, if you don't say this behavior is wrong, you guys are going to be stuck with Donald Trump and that form of politics with your party for who knows how long. So it's interesting that you would bring up a united front, because perhaps the concern is not just the front, but what comes behind that too. We're hearing now that there are some Republicans that are gathering and speaking about the future of the Republican Party and whether or not they should break off and form another party. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. We have some new reporting out today. My colleague Adam Brewster and I have been talking to some of these Republicans, former Republicans, who are trying to figure out how to move forward after Donald Trump. And they have held a summit over Zoom with about 120 people. Some, they say, are current elected officials. Most are former officials from the Reagan, Bush, Trump administrations. A lot of Republican officials who are kind of looking for a way to move the party forward. And there has been talk about whether to form a new party altogether. But people that we talked to yesterday acknowledged that that is really going to be difficult to do. So really what they're looking at or really focusing on are ways to move the party from within, kind of develop a faction of within the party that pushes for things that they believe in. So that would be, establishing some kind of infrastructure to support more moderate Republicans or Republicans who support conviction of the president. They're, looking to bolster people like Lisa Murkowski or Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, those types, but also perhaps promoting independent candidates. And they told us that they would even be up for supporting unifying, in their words, Democrats, someone in their words like a Mark Kelly in Arizona, if they are running against kind of extremist, in their words, Republicans. So we'll stay tuned. It's really just like a data point at this point in time as we're trying to kind of assess where the party goes from here. But it's significant that there are some in the party trying to figure out a way to move past the former president. Like perhaps Nikki Haley, Anne Marie, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. I know. There's a new report out in Politico that I urge our viewers to check out, where you hear for the very first time sort of a full-throated rejection of President Trump and his behavior, specifically as it relates, and I asked you about this yesterday, Caitlin, if we were going to hear from former Vice President Mike Pence, who Governor Haley is friends with, and, was pretty shocked by the behavior of President Trump, former President Trump. And we saw the video just minutes after the vice president is whisked away from the Senate chambers as the Capitol was being overrun, as it was being sacked. The president tweeted a couple of minutes after that in an effort to get him to go beyond his constitutional duty. So Nikki Haley may be one of the ones you're talking about, Caitlin. We'll see. Well, she has started her own political organization. She has been weighing in on lots of different issues, so certainly someone to keep an eye on as we're looking to see who might run 4 years from now. I know that seems like an eternity, but kind of looking at who is trying to jump into the conversation and how remains to be seen. But one key thing in our conversations that we were having yesterday is that we found that there has been an appetite since those attacks, and that has spurred some kind of movement. It's not enough to change the party, as we know, talking about that polling, but it does give some of those a little bit of wiggle room. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much. Thank you.